My husband finished moving with his typical condescending tone and asked me if I was done. I responded coldly without meeting his gaze. From that point on, I didn't utter a word and started preparing to leave the house. The daily berating from my husband and mother-in-law had reached its limit, and it felt like something within me had shattered. I knew I couldn't deal with them anymore. The moment my husband told me to leave, an odd calmness washed over me. Since then, I prioritized myself, ignoring both my husband and mother-in-law. The day after I truly left, I received several frantic calls from my mother-in-law. When she asked, "Who's this?" my feigned ignorance left her dumbfounded. From that point on, the nefarious actions of my husband and mother-in-law were exposed, and their lives spiraled into chaos. My name is Catherine. I work part-time at a nearby deli. I married Bob at 25, gave birth to our son Charlie at 28, and now, as we celebrate our 25th wedding anniversary, we're both 50. Recently, Charlie graduated from college and began his life as a working adult. It felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. These 25 years weren't just full of joy. There were hardships and haunting memories from the past. Looking back, Bob and I were never a great couple. While divorce was never on the table, we had our fair share of big arguments stemming from trivial things. However, once Charlie was born, those moments became less frequent. Charlie was like a dream come true for Bob, who always wanted a boy. Despite my decision not to have more children and to focus on raising Charlie, our relationship wasn't always smooth. Charlie went through his rebellious phase, and we had disagreements about his future. Yet he was always straightforward, clear about what he wanted and needed to do, never hesitating to share his opinions. I believed Charlie should pursue his passions, but Bob had a different idea. Listen up. A man's worth is in his education. I'll never approve if you just finish high school. And if you go to college, it better be a top one, or I ain't paying. Bob tried to force Charlie onto a path he laid out. Charlie, however, wasn't one to stay quiet. In the end, he clashed with Bob and chose a college program he desired. Despite the ongoing issues, Charlie successfully graduated, giving us something to be thankful for. As we both turned 50, we looked forward to our second life, hoping for a peaceful time in our later years. Unfortunately, those faint hopes were soon shattered when a visit from my mother-in-law dramatically changed my life. One day after work, I returned home to find a pair of women's shoes at the entrance, indicating a visitor. Heading to the living room, I discovered my mother-in-law there. Upon realizing I was home, she let out an exaggerated sigh. Bob, with a lazy tone, informed me that his mom wanted to live with us because she felt lonely living alone after the recent passing of my father-in-law. She had already given up her apartment, leaving us with seemingly no option but to let her stay with us. While I empathized with her feelings, I wasn't thrilled about the sudden decision for her to move in. Dealing with my mother-in-law had always been challenging for me. Until now, it had been just Bob, Charlie, and me living together. However, there was a time when we briefly lived with my in-laws right after we got married. Back then, my mother-in-law adamantly opposed Bob moving out, pushing aggressively for us to live together. Reluctantly, I agreed, but it quickly became unbearable due to her intrusive nature. Her constant comments about when we'd have kids and criticism of my cooking may have contributed to my fertility issues. Bob, realizing the situation wasn't good, persuaded her, with my father-in-law's help, to let us move out. However, it seemed like she held a grudge against me ever since. Despite visiting during holidays, we generally avoided them throughout the rest of the year. Just when we thought we had regained our peace, the idea of living together again seemed unthinkable. As I tried to process everything, Bob sighed and advised me not to be so obvious with my feelings, considering it rude to his mom. He assumed I would object, and he believed it would be a waste of time to discuss it since my siblings were busy with their own kids, leaving his mom with no one else to rely on. However, it became evident that he was quite irritated. Since she had already given up her place, there seemed to be no turning her away. Exhausted, I attempted to sit on the couch, but she stopped me. insisting that I go make dinner. She wouldn't even let me rest, and as expected, she complained about the meal. Thinking that this would be my life day in and day out gave me a headache. Later on, both Bob and my mother-in-law informed me that they had something to discuss. Apparently, they wanted to undertake some renovations. The house, being quite old, did need some repairs here and there, and we had taken care of those minor issues. However, what she particularly didn't like were the plumbing areas. She claimed the bathroom and toilet looked old and dingy and needed a makeover. Strangely, she had no intention of using the kitchen, so she said it was fine the way it was. Our mortgage was set to finish when we turned 60, giving us about 10 years left on it. Even so, I wasn't keen on the idea of renovating. A few days later, unbelievably, while I was at work, she took it upon herself to get an estimate and even signed a contract with a contractor. To make matters worse, Bob withdrew a large chunk from our retirement savings without my knowledge, costing us thousands of dollars. When I confronted Bob, he lost his temper, asserting that the house was in his name, and he could do whatever he wanted. He questioned why someone with a measly part-time job was always butting in. I was speechless, struggling to make him understand the sacrifices I made, giving up my career for our family. It's been about 6 months since we started living with my self-centered mother-in-law. Initially, it seemed she had moved in due to loneliness. However, as time passed, I started suspecting other motives. She appeared worried about her own care in her old age and finances. It turned out she almost had no inheritance from my late father-in-law and no savings of her own. Despite receiving a pension, she never took out any life insurance, and her hobby was playing slot machines, which baffled me. Currently unemployed, she relies on a pension that my father-in-law had been contributing to for years. Despite this, she always claimed to be broke, blowing her entire pension on slot machines the same day. As a result, she constantly made lavish requests without contributing a dime, forcing us to cut back on many of our expenses. She would often express her desire to eat out or purchase expensive cosmetics to maintain a youthful appearance. Since Bob was reluctant to spend money on anything other than himself, my mother-in-law consistently approached me for cash. Initially, I would assist her by purchasing essentials and occasionally providing some money. However, as the requests accumulated over time, I decided to put my foot down and refuse to give her any more. This decision seemed to cause her significant stress, leading her to continue her gambling habit and pursue insatiable desires. To my shock, she resorted to sneakily stealing small amounts from my wallet, hoping I wouldn't notice. When I realized some cash was missing, I confronted her, but she played dumb. From that day on, her harassment escalated. She had been bad-mouthing me to Bob, portraying me as the villain. As a result, my husband began looking at me with disdain, accusing me of accusing his mother without proof. Their mistreatment intensified, and one day, during an argument with Bob, his mother interjected, accusing me of living off her son's salary and belittling me for being just a part-timer. They treated me not as a family member, but more like a maid. Bob wouldn't even address me by my name. Their constant harassment took a toll on my mental well-being, and I reached my breaking point. One morning, after my mother-in-law left for her daily walk, I mustered the courage to tell Bob that I couldn't live with his mother anymore. Unexpectedly, his reaction was explosive. His face turned red as he shouted, claiming there were plenty of women who could replace me, ordering me to leave and never show my face again. Shocked, something inside me shattered, be it my rationality or my patience. With a calm voice, I acknowledged his words, quickly got ready, and left for work. Since then, I prioritized myself, ignoring both Bob and his mother. About a week after our fight, Bob, still looking down on me, asked if I had moved out yet. His mother had asked the same, but I didn't make eye contact, simply responding, "I'm leaving." After that, I didn't utter another word, grabbed my things, and left the house we had lived in for years. As expected, the very next day, my mother-in-law bombarded me with incessant calls. The frequency of her calls felt borderline insane. It became too bothersome to pick up, so I ignored my mother-in-law's incessant calls. When the calls persisted to the point where I couldn't even look at my phone, I decided to block her. Soon after, a call came from Bob's phone. Contemplating whether to ignore it or not, I ultimately answered, expecting to face the issue eventually. To my surprise, it wasn't Bob, but his mother on the other end, questioning why I was ignoring her and accusing me of being rude. Suppressing my laughter, I responded, "Sorry, who's this? This number belongs to my husband, Bob, but some strange woman's calling. I better hang up." Emphasizing my point, I disconnected the call. However, the phone rang again, and this time, it was Bob. Furious, he shouted at me, accusing me of messing with him. Unusually, I fired back, catching him off guard and leaving him flustered. I sensed that Bob and his mother were trying to convey something, probably along the lines of not intending for me to leave and implying it would be tough without me as a free housekeeper. But I had reached my breaking point, and Bob's words were just the final straw. I declared that I had no intention of returning to that house, unable to see myself living with him or his mother any longer. I suggested getting a divorce. After that, I could hear Bob and his mother arguing in the background. Their muffled conversations seemed to revolve around topics like my part-time income, the embarrassment of divorcing at our age, and doubts about my decision to leave. I firmly stated that discussing the divorce terms would be more productive than talking to them, and I declared my intention to get a lawyer. As I was about to hang up, Bob pleaded in a desperate tone, asking me to come back, admitting he was wrong. Curious about what he wanted, I listened. However, his apology seemed half-hearted, and he made a ridiculous request for me to return. It was clear he would revert to his condescending ways. Infuriated, I retorted that I'm not his personal maid and suggested hiring someone for housework. Bob shouted at me, attempting to intimidate me, but over the phone, I stood my ground. Frustrated, he pleaded, asking me to wait and apologizing again. I decided to reveal everything his mother had been doing behind his back, from stealing money to selling his cherished belongings at a thrift shop. Bob seemed disbelieving and checked the closet as I detailed the theft of his brand-name bags and clothes. In the midst of commotion on the call, Bob discovered that his prized possessions were indeed missing. His mother continued to feign innocence, even suggesting a burglar might be responsible for the theft. I calmly pointed out the impossibility of an intruder breaking in, highlighting the security measures we had in place with a contracted security company and surveillance cameras. The evidence strongly indicated an inside job, suggesting that his mother was using the death of his father as an excuse to target our money. I emphasized that the police couldn't intervene in civil matters, implying that Bob would indeed have his hands full with the situation. Bob's stifled sobs were evident as I confronted him with the truth about his mother's actions. He mentioned contacting me regarding the divorce, and I reiterated my firm decision. Days later, we met at a local diner to discuss matters further. Bob and his mother appeared haggard, with the receipt from her purse confirming the sale of Bob's belongings. In the meeting, Bob expressed his awareness of his mother's financial troubles and suggested getting her a place in a public housing project without offering financial assistance. However, I made it clear that my only goal was the divorce, not involvement in their financial affairs. Despite Bob's pleas and promises to repay the money his mother took, I remained resolute in seeking a divorce. As the conversation seemed to veer towards reconciliation, I tried to redirect the focus back to the divorce. Bob's pleas intensified, with him begging for forgiveness and promising never to upset me again. Unmoved, I reiterated my desire for a divorce. Frustrated by the lack of progress, I decided to take a different approach. Pulling out a photograph from my bag, I revealed Bob's affair with a coworker that had been going on for over a year. The picture captured Bob walking hand in hand with the other woman. The revelation shocked both Bob and his mother, who had turned even paler. I explained that I had discovered the affair a year ago, but kept silent to avoid impacting Charlie's college years. However, now, with the added stress from his mother and Bob's mistreatment, I had reached my limit. I disclosed that if he didn't agree to the divorce, I was prepared to hold him accountable for the affair. This affair, which I initially considered overlooking, had become a breaking point for me. Bob, visibly shaken, begged me not to divorce, claiming it was just a fling. His mother also tried to intervene, mentioning the potential shock it would cause Charlie. In the aftermath of the revelations, I met Bob and his mother at a local diner to discuss the divorce. To their surprise, Charlie, whom I had already informed about the situation, joined us. With a stern look, Charlie directed disdain towards Bob, expressing his disappointment. He highlighted that learning about the affair was shocking, but what his grandmother had done was even worse. Bob's mother appeared on the verge of tears. Bob, in his pitiful state, became defensive, scolding Charlie, claiming it didn't concern him and accusing him of getting too big for his britches. However, Charlie calmly reminded Bob of his lack of family commitment, emphasizing that work had always been his first love. Charlie pointed out that his mother took care of everything at home, even funding his high school and college education, while Bob was neglectful of family responsibilities. Bob was left aghast, not expecting such revelations from his son. Charlie's words were a wake-up call, exposing Bob's long-standing irresponsibility with money. The truth was, Bob had a habit of wasting money, similar to his mother's lavish spending on slot machines and outings with younger men. This financial strain was one reason why we hadn't had more children. Bob tried to interrupt, claiming he made payments, and his mother agreed, but I continued to state my case. I emphasized my significant contributions to living expenses, managing funds for Charlie's education, and never receiving financial support from Bob. Charlie supported my claims, revealing that Bob never gave him any gifts or allowances. Facing this undeniable truth, Bob and his mother were left speechless. Charlie expressed that despite being seen as an heir, his mother was the one who supported him during his college years. Bob's attempts to defend himself and his mother were futile. At this point, I declared that I had had enough and wanted a divorce. Charlie affirmed his support for me, and we left the cafe, leaving Bob and his mother in stunned silence. After the divorce, Bob's affair was exposed at his workplace, leading to his demotion and transfer. The woman he had the affair with faced consequences as well, with the truth of her initiating the affair surfacing, leading to her voluntary resignation. Post-divorce, Bob continued to live in the house with his mother, struggling with household chores and financial difficulties. His savings were meager, and his life took a downturn, marked by unemployment and gambling addiction. The once proud home was now in disarray, and rumors circulated about Bob selling the house and moving to an apartment. In contrast, I rented an apartment near Charlie and his fiance's home as my new residence. They expressed their desire for me to be close by, and I embraced my role as a supportive mother-in-law. Learning from the past, I aimed to strike a balance between being helpful and not interfering too much. With the prospect of grandchildren in the future, I looked forward to a peaceful and lively second chapter in my life.